Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm back with another book review. I know it has been a really long time, but there has been stuff going on in the meanwhile, which we can get into later. But today, I'm doing a special triple review because I'm trying to get a little bit quicker with my analyses and not drag on too long. Number one, The Haar by David Sodergren. So this is kind of like if Stephen King books were dumb. Remember Goosebumps? This is Goosebumps for adults. The plot begins with Muriel, who lives on a Scottish coastline fishing village, and she's an older lady, and the whole community in the fishing village is basically retirees, including her best friend Arthur, who's her neighbor. Her husband's dead, he died at sea and just sort of vanished, and the community's in trouble because there's an American billionaire who's trying to buy out the property for a golf course, and he's trying to force everybody out. If they won't accept his offers for their property, then he sends the police or hired assassins, this is a real thing, or arsons. So there's the villain of this story. Muriel is the protagonist. I thought it was cool to have a protagonist who was an old lady, because... Guys, stop it. Get out of there. I thought it was cool to see a protagonist as an old lady because there's just not something that's common. It's usually young people in a horror story at the point of their lives where they have the most to lose. So Muriel's interesting protagonist from that perspective, but nothing's ever really done with that. She's just kind of old and weak and slow and has a difficult time getting around to do stuff, which makes her the perfect puppy to kick for this American billionaire, this Mr. Grant, who is the worst antagonist that I've ever read. He's so comically evil that nothing in this book is possible to take seriously. Everything is exaggerated to the point of it feeling like a joke. You remember Mortal Kombat? How we all knew that it sucked compared to Street Fighter, but we thought it was cool anyway because you could rip a dude's spine out of his body on screen. That's what this is. There's no subtlety to it. Every scene that happens in between the death scenes feels just sort of like an edging toward the death scenes, which are all supposed to be cathartic, I'm sure, but they're so gratuitous, and not even in a visceral kind of way, but in an actual cartoony way. The bad guys all die. That's the whole point, is you're watching Muriel get bullied and harassed and tormented by these bad guys, and then you watch a sea monster kill them, and that's supposed to be fun. The sea monster in question is one that Muriel finds lying on the beach. It happens to have knowledge of her dead husband and takes his form, and so she falls in love with it, which is pretty odd, but not out of the pocket of normal horror stories. And she uses the monster to kill off, not systematically, but just pretty much by happenstance because they wander into the wrong place at the wrong time. These affiliates of Mr. Grant who are trying to get people to move out of the community. I just got to go back to these death scenes because the gore is ridiculous. And I've read books with some pretty visceral and gnarly, mutilation or torment. Stuff that made my skin kind of crawl, but nothing about this. It's, like I said, it's like a cartoon. It's Goosebumps. Stuff is just so ridiculous and over the top, and you get a sense that the author doesn't actually have any idea of what a horrific, painful death would be like. They're not really expressing what it is, and I don't think they care to, because the people that are dying are all bad guys that you want to see die, so that's kind of a cheap setup and payoff. There's really nothing that much more to say about The Haar. It's something that I wouldn't recommend to anybody. I'm not going to read any more of David Sodergren's work because I get the sense that it's all kind of the same way. The ending isn't okay, and there were enough sort of sweet moments because this book is technically played out like a romance with some horrific, gruesome kill scenes. You know those people that say they like horror movies because of the kills? Like how they talk about like the kills are really cool in a horror movie? They're the ones that get into stuff like the new Texas Chainsaw Massacre or all the Friday the 13th or Jason movies. They like the characters and they like the antagonists, supposedly. Not really antagonists. In slashers, I guess they're more protagonists, but they get into those movies and they watch them because of how horrific the kill scenes are and how cool they are. That's the kind of people that this book is written for. It's lower than pulp. I would avoid it at all costs. And next up, this is Dominion by Bentley Little. This is one that I heard about as I'm perusing boards and writers groups. That was supposed to be one of the gnarliest horror books. Had renown for being a little bit more grody than the rest of them. And it definitely has a cool premise. It's about they come off like a coven of witches at first. But will you quit that? Will you chill out? So the plot of this one is definitely interesting. It kind of plays out the way that you would expect once you get a handle on what the premise is. But the Maenads have existed since in the world that we are familiar with since ancient Greece and Rome and wherever else Dionysus was worshipped. And they have managed to hide Dionysus' essence in the DNA of certain people and have been using a selective breeding program in order to give birth to a body fit for Dionysus to inhabit. So that's that's definitely a cool premise that doesn't get explored that much. It just kind of explains why things are happening the way they're happening. Other gods don't get a chance for this, but that kind of makes sense because of Dionysus' whole thing with resurrection. But this is a gnarly version of Dionysus. This is the extreme Bacchanalian, almost Shiva aspect of Dionysus, where creation and destruction are blurred into one orgasmic, pleasurable experience. And the main characters that we're dealing with here are a girl who is raised by a group of Maenads, specifically to give birth to Dionysus, or at least resurrect him. It's a little bit unclear about how that whole process is supposed to go, but it does play out with a boy that she meets from school, who they develop a romance, and he begins to take on aspects of Dionysus. And so there's that. One of my favorite things in horror is a group of people who are in the know but are operating kind of in the shadows in the background. They're kind of puppet masters, developing relationships and scenarios, guiding people toward the purposes that they have plotted out for them. That's done pretty well. It's a little bit transparent that the Maenads are way, way, way more sinister than what they in real life would want you to think. They're really sketchy folks, but the young teenagers that are the protagonists in this story seem to just kind of roll with it, even though they understand that something's wrong. But that is also explained because of gods and magic. The influence of Dionysus is present in wine. So the Maenads run a winery in the valleys of California. So that's pretty exciting. What happens eventually is, of course, Dionysus does get resurrected, and the catastrophic consequences of his manifestation in this idealistic, sorry, I didn't mean idealistic, this idyllic winery community. Let me take that again. Dionysus gets resurrected into this idyllic winery community in California, and the consequences are catastrophic and reading about that is definitely one of the more interesting parts of the book. The whole last third, pretty much, is this nearly post-apocalyptic scenario where everybody becomes a reveler in Dionysus' everlasting party. There is a lot of carnage, a lot of sexual carnage too, which blending those two types of things is not at all new for the genre of horror in pretty much whatever media, but it's continuous because it's effective. A lot of times people in their psychology have a pretty clear division between pleasure and pain, and bodily injury and harm represent one end of that spectrum with the pain, and then bodily pleasure in terms of sex and intercourse and orgasm, that's on the opposite. And so when you blend those, when you interpolate them, you get some very confusing sensory impulses, and that's what this story leans into, with Dionysus being the way he is. The Maenad's plan is to develop this wine that sort of imbues everybody who drinks it with a tendency toward revel with Dionysus, energy. So the whole valley goes to shit because people don't do anything besides drink, fuck, and murder forever. That's Dionysus' dominion. It's long. The book is long. It feels like there's more stuff in here than... No, I put that the wrong way. Nothing that happens in the book is extraneous to the plot, but a lot happens. It is long. It takes a while to get through. I'm going to check it in front of my face real quick here. 400 plus pages. It does feel like it goes on for a long time. Everything does make sense and everything does add up, and there was never a part where I felt like that didn't need to be there. But considering how much mundane stuff happens in contrast with the really crazy, honestly fucking bonkers batshit stuff that happens whenever Dionysus gets manifested properly and begins to assert his dominion, it felt really long. The ending is satisfying. It's one of those where I don't really want to go into detail on the plot because I feel like I'll be giving too much away. I went into the book totally blind, just knowing that people considered it an extreme example of this type of supernatural horror, and it is. I don't think it's a good book, but if you are into extreme ideas and nutso-futso premises like that, and you appreciate an author playing it all straight and allowing it to all unravel logically, it's a very, very cool book. Very interesting read. I never got bored of it. I ripped through it pretty quick, actually. I'm not gonna go look for more of this author's books, but this one was cool. And this is The Ceremonies by T.E.D. Klein. I'm so dumb that when I got this book, I kept reading the name as Ted Klein, and I did a couple of searches looking for some of his other work under the name Ted Klein, and I was like, how come I'm not finding anything by this guy? But it is T.E.D. Weird way to write your name, dude. Weird way. It's confusing. But that's the only criticism that I have for this book, because it's great. This is written in the 80s, but it's sort of complicated to explain. There's a lot of meta commentary on gothic horror, while the book itself is a gothic horror. But it doesn't do anything cheesy with playing with self-awareness and metatextual references too much. But the main character is an author. Hello, Stephen King, second reference. And he's writing a dissertation, because he's a teacher, at a university in New York, and he's writing a dissertation on Gothic literature. So there's a lot of commentary diegetically from this author as he is reading over the course of a summer a whole bunch of different, not so much eras, because they're all pretty much 17th to 19th century Gothic horrors, which I'm dumb. I guess that's pretty much the extent of all of them. But he goes off to the countryside. He moves out of New York City proper and moves to the countryside into a community of a group of folks that are of some kind of vague Christian faith. It's not explicitly stated what their name is, and I don't think it's actually anything exactly like what is in the real world, but they're essentially like oh no, I forgot what they're called. Oh, Mennonites. That's what they are. They stay close in their own community, and they run their own businesses, and they do own vehicles and property, and they do business with the regular outside world outside of their community, but they don't use electricity. So a couple of these folks have a old shed that they repurpose for a living space, and they're renting it out to somebody. So our protagonist, the author, he goes out to this very rural farming community, and there is a lot of interesting and entertaining interplay between his New York City boy tendencies and these folks that live way, way off the grid as they try to get along. And you see them butt heads over stuff, but they're relatively mature, all of them, and the way that they work out their differences is honestly written so well that if the entire book was just about an author from New York trying to make do with the living conditions among this very, very austere and Spartan religious community, it could have been entertaining on its own. But of course, that's not what it's all about. There's also a girl involved, and she is a librarian with not much life experience, kind of the archetypal damsel in distress heroine, where she's nearly perfect and very pure-hearted and pure-minded. And of course, she develops an interest in the author, who is really wanting to bang her. Like typical Gothic novels, you have a lot of sexual tension driving the bad decisions of the characters. There's the central conflict in this one, along with a whole bunch of these other traditional Gothic stories, is the animalistic type of drive inside a person and their more developed human social senses, and the way that those two clash. That type of thing is played out in the story narratively, usually by invoking the supernatural and the way that it sort of begins to meld and mesh with the mundane world. And the Ceremonies is no exception. The girl makes an acquaintance with a being that is ancient and malevolent as shit. Real mean type of sucker who has taken some kind of damage to their body in the past and needs to enact this sequence of ceremonies in order to bring itself back to its full power or capacity. A lot of that is vague, which is fine, actually better. This is one of those types of things where you don't want everything explicated like to a technical level, so that you know exactly what kind of puzzle pieces need to fit together and what their shape is. It's a lot of it, the threat to the protagonists is insinuated, which is, once again, this book is playing off of the tropes of the Gothic novel self-consciously, but not deconstructively. It's a tribute or an honor just as much as it is the thing in itself. So the girl gets involved too deeply with this entity that takes the guise of an old man, who becomes her benefactor as he's getting her to research all these types of things so that she can compile them into documents that allow him to understand what is needed to be done in order to get these ceremonies working properly. He's tried some before, they haven't worked, and it just happens to have been taking place out in the religious community where the author has been staying. So he's seeing what's happened in the past with these tragedies that nobody really talks about because they don't understand them and they want to move past them, even if it means pretending they didn't happen, while the girl is basically ensuring that they do happen. And she's seeing it from a perspective even further in the past, from documentation and folklore. And when they come together, you see the plots, not the plot of the book necessarily, but you see the plots of this antagonist, this ancient evil, accelerate because he begins manipulating both the author and the girl. Their natural tendencies to be attracted to each other and be kind to one another upsets his plots, so he has to engineer ways in order to keep them apart or sow distrust or discord between the two, because of course he needs the girl to be a virgin, because that's the way that rituals work. Only works if you kill a virgin. Not that she dies. I'm not giving anything away. But the interplay between these vastly different characters with vastly different backgrounds is really elegantly orchestrated and a joy to read. I loved it. I loved watching the New York City author dealing with these weirdo country bumpkin religious folks. The way that they view each other is very interesting because you get perspectives from everyone all around the table rather than from one character looking at the others. You can't really help but empathize with the way that all of them feel about the others, because every one of them has reasonable positions and logical perspectives on the way that the others behave and live and what those lifestyles entail and what may come of them. And you also feel how it is to be in that situation where you're talking to somebody whose lifestyle or ethics or morals don't align with yours, but you either push yourself to get through those differences just for the sake of social harmony, or you find yourself questioning whether adherence to your own principles is as important as learning from what the others have to say. You see the whole spectrum of these social interactions, and that's great. When the actual creepy stuff starts coming in, it is genuinely creepy because it's like if a four-way intersection suddenly went totally haywire and the signals didn't work anymore and every single lane all went plowing into all the other lanes. It's not just an accident, but it's a huge pileup, and then a helicopter crashed on top of it. Like, there is so much going on in the background that slowly unfolds, and you get to watch the unveiling, and it matches up with the dynamics of the characters and the tension and the ebb and flow of their relationships and their thoughts about each other. That's what I mean by orchestration. There's a very harmonious vector between what's going on with this strange ancient entity and the way that he's engineering these rituals to take place, and then the very, very close dynamic between the author and the librarian and the way that their relationship develops, as well as his relationship with the religious folks on the farm. And then there's the extra dimension of their relationship with everybody in their community, not approving of how libertine it is to have an atheist from the big city staying with them and potentially influencing what they do, fearing that it will draw them further from their faith. Altogether, the way that it coalesces. What the fuck? Can you guys not? My puzzle box broke. a cat kicked it off of my side table and the puzzle box is broken. I liked that puzzle box, so now I'm sad. But I'll keep on going. The way that the whole story coalesces is satisfying, and it isn't big and climactic like I've seen from some other novels of this ilk. But you're glad for what happens, and nothing really surprises you, but only if you're paying attention to the types of insinuations with all these weird ancient or sort of documents and bits of folklore and old beliefs and sets of divination cards. These kind of things all turn up one bit at a time, and slowly a web emerges from out of the shadow. You begin to see that all these links appear in between each one of these different little things, and by the time the entire web is spun, it looks like it's too late for everybody. And the way that things gets solved is fine, but it's not really about building up to a big climactic payoff. It's a fitting crescendo, but what's really great is watching the whole thing happen, which I would rather that in any kind of book over things building up to a big payoff, because every single page of this book, The Ceremonies, is cool. Every single page is interesting. Something interesting happens all the time. You are engaged because you are responsible partly for making the connections between these odd things that crop up here and there. And you also never feel cheated by characters having information withheld from them, because even though you know what's up before they do, you're never annoyed by them making ignorant or just stupid choices in order to have something in the plot become, worse than it needs to be, which is one of these bad things that you see in a lot of these books, like the Haar. This is a good one though. T.E.D. Klein's The Ceremonies. I will be finding more T.E.D. Klein. Anyway, I do have a couple more book reviews that I am going to be doing on this channel, but then no more after that. What's going to happen after that is I'm going to be moving my reviews to a new channel. This is No Uncertain Terms Productions, which is a group of artists, myself, and a handful of others that are going to be making music, and we're going to be running a podcast, and we're also going to be posting videos, just of interesting stuff that we find. We have some very talented and creative people on board, and we don't have a lot of content out there right now, but there's going to be more all the time. And you can find that channel on YouTube here if you search No Uncertain Terms Productions, and if I remember, I'll put a link down in the description. So if you are interested in seeing any more kind of reviews like this, not only will we be posting them there, but we're also going to be reviewing some books on our new podcast, which is going to be coming out probably close to the end of this month, and you'll be able to find that all over the place as well as on YouTube here too. This is actually the next one that we've got coming up. This is by Silvano Arietti, Creativity, The Magic Synthesis. Myself and one or two of the others are going to be doing a entire podcast episode revolving around that book, and we'll give our thoughts on it, and we'll come up with other stuff to read, and we'll be doing some stuff about video games, we'll be talking about some movies, and sometimes we'll just be bullshitting about life. So stay tuned for at least a couple more book reviews here, but don't forget to go over to the No Uncertain Terms Productions profile, or our account there, and please subscribe and watch more of our stuff there, because I'm not going to be doing anything else on this channel. I'm going to let it ride. But thank you for watching.